You're kind of a burden now, Dad. Maybe it's time you moved somewhere else. That's what my son said. Right there. In front of his friends. They laughed like it was a harmless joke. Like my life, my presence, was just some inconvenience. I was in the next room, holding a tray of drinks, frozen in place. That house wasn't just walls and furniture. It was the last thing my wife ever touched. I built it with my hands and filled it with love. So I smiled, stepped into the room, and quietly slipped the house keys into my pocket. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. I didn't always feel like a burden. In fact, there was a time I was everything: a husband, a father, a provider, a builder of dreams. The man who stood tall, even when life tried to knock him down. And back then, Dean was just a little boy with a head full of wild curls, always chasing birds in the yard and tugging on my pant leg, asking if I could carry him one more time. I met Marjorie in 1978 at a 4th of July picnic. She was wearing a blue dress with little white flowers on it, and she laughed like she didn't know the world could ever be cruel. She had a warmth that made everyone around her softer, including me. We didn't have much: a used pickup truck, a rented one-bedroom apartment, and a chipped porcelain tea set she insisted on keeping, but we had each other. And for us, that was more than enough. When Dean was born, I swear I didn't sleep for a week. I'd just sit in that old rocking chair, holding him close, listening to his breathing. Marjorie would smile from the bed and say, "You're more nervous than he is." And I'd whisper, "I just don't want to miss a second." That's how I lived the next 2 decades, not missing a second. I worked long days as a carpenter, came home smelling of sawdust and sweat, and still had enough energy to toss Dean in the air and make him laugh. We built the house together, literally. I bought the land in '84 and spent 3 years hammering, sanding, painting. Marjorie picked every color, every tile. Dean was 7 when he helped me nail in the final floorboard in the living room. We signed our names on the underside with permanent marker: Dad, Mom, Dean, this is home. We weren't rich, but we never needed much. Marjorie cooked like her mother taught her: big pots of stew in winter, garden salads in summer, always with a side of sweet tea. We'd eat around the same wooden table every night. No phones, no distractions. Just stories, laughter, and the occasional stern look when Dean tested the line. He was a good boy. Kind, curious, smart in ways I wasn't. I remember one night when he was about 10, he looked at me after dinner and said, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." I didn't cry then, but I did later that night, once he'd gone to bed. Dean was my pride. I paid for his school, taught him how to drive, stood in the freezing rain to watch his football games, even when he sat the bench. Marjorie used to say I loved him so fiercely, it scared her. "You're giving him everything, Joe. Don't forget to save a little for yourself," she'd tease. But I didn't care. I was raising a good man. At least I thought I was. Marjorie got sick when Dean was in college. At first, it was fatigue. Then a cough. Then the hospital visits began. I took her to every appointment, held her hand through every scan, every treatment. Dean came when he could, but he had classes, friends, a life of his own. Marjorie never blamed him. She'd wave away my frustration and say, "He's young. Let him live." She passed away in our bedroom one quiet morning, just as the sun was coming through the blinds. I sat beside her for hours, holding her hand long after it went cold. Dean arrived that afternoon. He hugged me, but his eyes stayed dry. He was 23. Too young to lose a mother. Too young to understand what it meant. After the funeral, he moved back in for a while. Said he wanted to help me settle, to be there. But I think we were both just scared of the silence. Eventually, he met Erica. She was polite, always polite, but there was a distance in her smile. I tried to welcome her, tried to make her feel at home. Marjorie would have wanted that. So when they asked to move in after their wedding, to save for a house, I said yes. It made sense. The house was big. Too big for one man. And I missed the sound of voices in the kitchen, footsteps in the hallway. For a while, it felt like life again. I'd make breakfast sometimes, leave little notes for them on the fridge, fix the leaky faucet without being asked. I didn't expect gratitude, just respect. A little kindness. But slowly, things changed. The fridge filled with things I didn't recognize. My recliner was moved to make space. My morning coffee became a disruption to Erica's yoga. They never said it outright, but I began to feel tolerated. Still, I told myself it was natural. Kids grow up. Things shift. I adjusted. Kept to my corner of the house. Found comfort in my routines. Early walks. Afternoon tea. Visiting Marjorie's grave on Sundays. I didn't say much. But I watched. I noticed. The missing thank yous. The sideways glances when I repeated a story. The way Erica would sigh when I entered a room. Dean, he'd just look at the floor. But I never imagined it would come to that day, the laughter, the word burden, tossed so carelessly in a room that still smelled of Marjorie's cinnamon oil. He used to want to be just like me. And now? Now he didn't even want me in the house I built with my bare hands. It's strange how disrespect doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in. Slow. Subtle. Like a slow leak under the sink, you don't notice it until your socks are wet. The first time I felt it, I was standing at the kitchen counter, slicing apples. Erica walked in, phone in hand, didn't look up. Just said, "Oh, Joe, can you use the cutting board? You're scratching the counter." I blinked. That counter had more scratches from Dean learning to use a butter knife than I could count. But I just nodded, sure thing. I even smiled. Then came the thermostat. Dean installed a smart one, and suddenly, the house I used to keep at a comfortable 72 felt like a meat locker. I'd ask him about it and he'd say, "It's automated, Dad. You just have to get used to it." I'd sit in the living room in a sweater and thick socks, my breath almost visible, and they'd walk in from their run in tank tops. Little things. Erica started using "we" when she talked about the house. We were thinking of repainting. We might knock down that wall next year. She never asked if I had an opinion. Why would she? In her eyes, I was just existing. Like a dusty old photo on the mantel. I'd still try to connect. I'd ask Dean how work was going. He worked in finance now, something with risk portfolios, he explained once, like I'd understand. I didn't. But I listened. Or tried to. He'd give me short answers, eyes on his phone, scrolling while I spoke. One day, I caught him rolling his eyes when I told a story at dinner. I was halfway through telling Erica how Marjorie once mistook a wild turkey for a raccoon and chased it with a broom. It used to make Dean laugh so hard he'd snort milk. But this time? He looked at his plate and said, "You've told that one before, Dad." The silence that followed stung. I pushed my food around with my fork, pretending I wasn't swallowing disappointment. I noticed how my mail started showing up opened. Erica would say, "It was just junk, Joe," with that smile, the kind that doesn't reach her eyes. I didn't say anything. But I started collecting the important envelopes before they could. They started inviting friends over more often, and I became a ghost in my own home. I'd retreat to my room, headphones on, listening to old jazz records, pretending the laughter downstairs didn't sound like I was the punchline. Then came the bathroom schedule. Erica left a sticky note on the mirror one morning, "Please reserve showers before 7:30 a.m. Water pressure issues." I stood there, holding my toothbrush, reading it over and over. I'd built that bathroom. Laid the tiles on my knees until my joints screamed. And now I needed a reservation to bathe. Dean, he wasn't cruel. Not outright. He just became distant. Passive. If I brought something up, he'd nod and say, "I'll talk to Erica," but nothing ever changed. Once, I asked him if we could have one meal a week together, just us. He smiled, patted my shoulder, and said, "Of course." It never happened. It's hard to admit, but I started doubting myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was this just what aging looked like, losing space, losing voice, becoming an afterthought? I told myself it was normal. That I had to adapt. That I had lived my life, and now it was their turn. But one night shattered that illusion. I was in the hallway, about to head to bed, when I heard them talking in the kitchen. Erica was whispering, but the walls of that house, I knew them better than I knew my own hands. She said, "He's always around. It's like living with a tenant who doesn't pay rent. We can't keep doing this, Dean." And Dean? He didn't defend me. He sighed and said, "I know. I don't know how to bring it up." Bring what up? I stood in the hallway, the light from the kitchen spilling across the floor like some ugly truth. I waited. Prayed for him to say something. Anything. To remind her that I was his father. That I built everything around them. That I gave him every break he ever got. But all he said was, "Maybe we should start looking at other options." Other options. I went to bed that night and didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows dancing like ghosts. I remembered holding Dean when he had chickenpox, singing lullabies off-key while Marjorie laughed from the doorway. I remembered staying up late to help him with math, fixing his bike, driving him to interviews. I remembered the time he broke a neighbor's window and I marched him over to apologize, hand on his shoulder the whole time. And now I was, a burden. They never said it outright. Not yet. But I felt it in the way Dean no longer said goodnight. In the way Erica labeled food containers with her name. In the way they laughed a little too freely when I wasn't in the room. The shift had happened. Quiet. Steady. Like the changing seasons. And somehow, without realizing it, I had become the winter they were waiting to escape. It happened on a Sunday. I remember the weather clearly, overcast, a bit humid, the kind of day where the air feels like it's holding its breath. Dean and Erica had invited some of their friends over for brunch. Not unusual, they'd been doing that more and more lately. I never minded. I always figured the house was big enough for everyone. After all, it was built for laughter, for family. Marjorie always said, if someone's hungry, they belong at the table. But no one asked if I wanted to join them. No one even told me they were coming. I woke up early, like always, and brewed a pot of coffee. By the time the smell reached the hallway, the front door was swinging open, voices filled the air, and the living room was crowded with half-familiar faces. I smiled anyway. Poured a second pot. Started cutting fruit. That's what I did, tried to be useful, tried to stay involved. I carried a tray of cut melon and bananas out to the patio and set it on the table. "Oh. Thanks, Joe," one of Erica's friends said, startled. I got a few polite nods, a weak smile. One of the young men glanced at me like I'd walked into the wrong room. Erica leaned over to Dean and whispered something. They both chuckled. I sat off to the side, on the patio bench, just listening. No one offered me a plate. No one asked me a question. I was wallpaper. Then the conversation shifted. One of the friends, I think his name was Matt, said, "So when are you guys finally getting the place to yourselves? Seems tight with a third wheel." The words barely landed before Dean replied. "Yeah, we're working on it. Just gotta get a few things lined up first." It's complicated, you know? Can't exactly evict your own father. They all laughed. Even Erica. She didn't laugh loud, but she smiled, that kind of twisted, smug smile that made my stomach turn. Evict. That word rang in my ears. Not move. Not relocate. Evict. I gripped the edge of the bench so hard my knuckles went white. And then Dean, my son, the boy who once cried when I left him at kindergarten, said something that shattered me. He shrugged and said, "He's kinda like an old appliance, you know? Still running, but you don't really need it anymore." Another wave of laughter. I stood up. Slowly. No one noticed. I walked back inside and closed the sliding door behind me, shutting out the sound of their joy. That evening, when everyone had left and the house was quiet, I asked Dean if I could speak with him. He looked tired, maybe hungover, and mumbled, "Can it wait, Dad?" "No," I said. "It can't." We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I used to feed him spoonfuls of mashed carrots. Where Marjorie taught him to read. Where we celebrated birthdays and Christmases and one unforgettable Thanksgiving when the turkey caught fire. I looked at him for a long moment. "I heard what you said today," I began. He blinked. "What?" "About the appliance. About evicting me." He shifted in his seat. "Dad, come on, it was a joke. Just stupid brunch talk. Is that what I am now? A stupid joke?" He ran a hand through his hair. "You're taking it too seriously." "Am I?" There was a pause. A heavy one. I saw it in his eyes, guilt, annoyance, something else I couldn't name. "I've lived in this house for 38 years, Dean," I said quietly. "Your mother and I built it from nothing. Every floorboard has our story in it. And now, I'm extra." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." He stood up. "Look, Erica and I just want some space, all right? It's hard living with someone all the time." I nodded slowly. "Yes. It is hard. I raised you. Lived through all the hard parts." "Don't do that," he snapped. "Don't make this about guilt." I stared at him. My own son. Defensive. Cold. A stranger with my jawline and his mother's eyes. "I'm not trying to guilt you," I said. "I'm trying to understand how the boy who once said I was his hero now sees me as a problem." He looked down. Said nothing. Then Erica came into the room. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing between us. Dean nodded. "Just talking." She turned to me and smiled, that same tight, professional smile. "Joe, we've been meaning to talk to you about options. There's a really great community in Willow Creek. They have excellent care and activities. It could be good for you." "I'm not a dog you're trying to rehome," I replied, more sharply than I meant to. Her smile faded. Dean said, "We just want what's best." I stood up. "You mean what's convenient?" And with that, I walked away. Not out of anger. Out of heartbreak. Later that night, I sat in Marjorie's old armchair, holding one of her scarves in my hands. I could still smell her perfume, lilac and cinnamon. The house felt heavy. Too full of echoes. Too empty of love. And the worst part? They didn't even realize what they'd done. The betrayal wasn't just in the words. It was in the silence that followed. In the lack of apology. In the fact that no one knocked on my door afterward to say, "We didn't mean it. You still belong here." Because to them, I didn't. A few weeks passed. Quiet ones. Too quiet. Dean and Erica stopped pretending. No more polite small talk, no more forced smiles over coffee. I became furniture, the kind you walk around without looking at, just waiting for the right time to move it out. I kept my routine, morning walks, tea at noon, an occasional crossword, but everything felt off. Like the house was holding its breath. Then one Thursday afternoon, I came back early from the store. I had gone out for bread and ended up sitting in the park for an hour, just thinking. Watching squirrels. Letting the wind do what it wanted with my thinning hair. When I walked through the back door, I heard voices from the dining room. I wasn't trying to snoop. I just stopped moving when I recognized their tones, low, sharp, hushed. I stood still, like I used to when Dean was a boy and I'd catch him sneaking cookies from the jar. "You said the lawyer would handle it," Erica hissed. "He is. But it takes time. We can't just throw him out. There's paperwork." "Well, he's not exactly doing backflips. He needs care. And the house isn't set up for that. We've talked about this, Dean." "I know. I know. But if we push too hard, he might change the will." There it was. I should have walked away. Should have coughed or made a sound. But I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the floor. My ears, suddenly sharper than they'd been in years. "We need to get that handled," Erica said. "You said he had a copy of it somewhere in the office. Can you find it? Or talk to his lawyer directly?" Dean sighed. "It's complicated. He trusts Margaret. She won't say anything unless he gives permission. Then push for it. He's old, Dean. He won't know what's going on if we frame it right. Just tell him it's a medical release form or something. You've done it before." I felt sick. I stepped back slowly, careful not to creak the floorboards. My heart pounded in my ears, but not from fear. From shame. Anger. Grief. They were planning to trick me. To lie. To steal. All under the roof I built. All while I made breakfast and folded towels and kept silent out of love. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the den, the old yellow lamp glowing beside me, and stared at the blank television screen. I thought about Marjorie. What she would say if she were here. She'd always been the voice of reason. The one who told me not to jump to conclusions. But even she would see the truth now. This wasn't just coldness. This wasn't distance. It was betrayal, plain and simple. I opened the top drawer of the cabinet beside me and pulled out the envelope I hadn't touched in years. Our will. The one Marjorie and I wrote together when Dean was still in high school. We had dreams then, of passing down the house, of family gatherings long after we were gone, of grandchildren playing in the backyard. I unfolded the papers with trembling hands. Dean was listed as the sole beneficiary. No stipulations. No warnings. Just trust. I felt like a fool. They were counting on me fading. On my mind slipping. On my heart softening when it should have been steel. I thought of every night I had stayed up to help Dean study. Every dollar I saved to send him to college. Every time I took the smaller piece of pie so he could have more. None of it mattered now. To them, I was a stepping stone to a bigger life. The next morning, I started watching everything differently. I noticed Erica always walked into the room without acknowledging me, unless she needed something. I saw how Dean only spoke in statements, never questions. I paid attention to what they didn't say. And I began to write it all down, small notes in a journal I kept hidden under my bed. Who came over? What was said? Any mention of finances or plans? I wasn't paranoid. I was awake now. I called Margaret, our lawyer, and scheduled an appointment. I didn't tell Dean. I didn't need to. I just told her, I think it's time to revisit some old paperwork. She paused. Joe, is everything all right? I swallowed. Not really. But it will be. I hung up and sat in the silence for a while. Not empty silence, purposeful. Like the house was waiting for me to do something. To stand up. Later that evening, as I was folding laundry, I found one of Marjorie's old sweaters. It still smelled faintly of her, lavender and lemon. I sat on the bed and held it to my face. I could almost hear her voice, "Protect what we built. Don't let them hollow it out." That was the night I stopped being afraid. They thought they could scheme behind my back. But I had been a builder all my life. And now, I would build something they couldn't tear down. Speech balloon. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I waited for the right moment to speak. Not out of fear, not anymore, but because I wanted the words to land. To sink in. I had spent too many nights swallowing my voice, hoping silence would somehow buy me dignity. But dignity doesn't come from staying quiet while you're pushed out of your own life. One morning, Dean was alone in the kitchen, making his protein shake. Erica had already left for work. I stepped in, calm, measured, and said, "We need to talk." He didn't look up. Just grunted, "Sure, what about?" I pulled out a chair and sat down. "I heard you and Erica. A few weeks ago. Talking about getting the house, the will, and sending me away." His hand froze mid-pour. For a second, he didn't say anything. Then he forced a short laugh. "Dad, come on. That's not." I held up my hand. Don't lie to me." He finally turned, leaning on the counter. "Okay. So maybe we talked about options. But can you blame us? You barely leave the house. You're always around. Erica and I are trying to live a normal life, and it's like, we can't even breathe." I looked at him carefully. "You ever think maybe I feel the same way? That this house doesn't feel like mine anymore?" "It's not about feelings," he snapped. "It's about practicality. You're getting older, Dad. You need help." "I'm getting older," I echoed, "so your solution is to steal the house and lie about my will?" He flinched. "We didn't say steal. You just wanted to trick me into signing something." "Same difference." Dean rubbed his forehead. "Look, Erica's been stressed, Anne." "This isn't about Erica," I interrupted. "This is about you. My son. The boy I carried on my shoulders. The young man I taught how to drive. The man who watched his mother die in this house and still let it become this cold." He stared at the floor. "You changed, Dean. And maybe I let you. Maybe I was so focused on being a good father that I forgot to be a strong one." He didn't answer. I stood, slowly, and placed my hand on the table. "I'm not going anywhere, Dean. Not until I decide. And not because you and your wife cooked up some scheme behind my back." Then I walked out, leaving him in the silence he once left me in. From that day on, something shifted. In him. In me. In the house. Dean barely spoke to me. Erica stayed even more distant, her eyes always narrowed, like I was some unpredictable element in their otherwise curated life. But I didn't flinch anymore. I wasn't waiting for their warmth. I started walking taller again. I reconnected with old neighbors. Glenn came by more often, sometimes with bread, sometimes just with stories. "Thought you might like this," he said one day, handing me a copy of the local newsletter. "Nice write-up on the new veterans program." I read it twice. A seed planted. Even Margaret, my lawyer, sent me a letter after our meeting. It was just a short note, handwritten, but it meant something. "Joe, you did the right thing. Your wife would be proud. Let me know when you're ready for the next step." That line sat with me for days. One afternoon, I walked out into the backyard. The garden beds were overgrown. Erica didn't like dirt clutter, as she called it, but I saw something there. Potential. Memory. I knelt down and pulled a few weeds with bare hands. A neighbor's daughter, maybe 9 or 10, peeked through the fence. "Are you making a garden?" "Trying to," I said, brushing dirt off my palms. "My grandma says gardens make you live longer." "Your grandma's a smart lady." She smiled, then ran off. That night, I sat with my journal and wrote a sentence I hadn't thought possible just weeks before: "You can lose your family and still find your life." The next morning, Erica brought me a stack of paperwork. "It's just some updates from the insurance," she said. I took them, smiled, and flipped through casually. Third page in, I saw the trick. A medical authorization form disguised to look like a routine update, but with a fine print clause allowing Dean access to financial and legal decisions, in cases of diminished capacity. She watched me, waiting. I smiled, folded the papers, and said, "Thanks, I'll look these over later." Then I slid them into my drawer. Untouched. She didn't mention them again. Later that week, I made another visit to Margaret. I told her about the papers. Her lips tightened. "Would you like to proceed with the new clause we discussed?" I nodded. "Yes. And I want to add something else." She leaned in, listening. "If anyone contests this will, the entire estate, house, assets, all of it, goes to a registered nonprofit." She blinked. "That's a big step." "I know," I said. "But so was raising a son who now sees me as a transaction." We made the changes. Signed the documents. Sealed the copies. When I walked out of her office, the sun hit me square in the face. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel old. I felt ready. They thought I'd be easy to manage, tired, confused, slow. But I was still the man who built this house with his hands, who buried his wife with his heart, and who taught his son what love looked like. Even if that son forgot. Margaret's office hadn't changed in years. Same chipped bookshelf in the corner, same mug full of pens that didn't work, same framed photo of her dog, a big golden retriever named Daisy, smiling like she ran the place. I used to come here with Marjorie. Back then, we'd sit side by side, fingers laced together, talking about the future like it was something solid. Tangible. We weren't wealthy, but we had plans. We wanted Dean to have a home base. A place to come back to. To feel safe. It's strange how a dream can shift from a gift to a weapon in someone else's hands. Margaret looked at me the way old friends do, with a kind of calm knowing. She didn't rush. Just let me sit there quietly for a while, staring at the file on the desk between us. "You sure you're ready for this, Joe?" she asked softly. I nodded. "It's time." She opened the folder and began reviewing the documents we'd already updated, pulling Dean and Erica from the inheritance, assigning full ownership of the house to a trust in Marjorie's name, and now, the clause. "If the will is contested," she read aloud, "the entire estate, including the house, savings, and personal belongings, will be forfeited and donated in full to the Silver Pines Veterans Fund." She looked up. "Once this is filed, it's binding. If Dean tries to fight it, he gets nothing." "That's the point," I said. Margaret set her pen down. "You're not doing this out of spite, are you?" I shook my head. "Not spite. Clarity. If he wants to walk away from me, fine. But he doesn't get to take Marjorie's memory down with him." She leaned back and studied me for a moment. "You're not the same man who came in here 3 months ago." "No," I said, quietly. That man still thought his son would come around. We spent the next hour reviewing each clause. Margaret explained every word in plain English, though she knew I understood most of it. She was kind like that, patient without being patronizing. When I signed the final page, my hand didn't shake. "You want to keep the original, or should I keep it here?" I'll take a copy. I paused, then added, actually, 2 copies. One for myself. One for Dean. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You sure? Oh, I'm sure. When I left her office, the copy of the new will tucked in a sealed envelope, I stopped by the park bench across the street. The same one I used to take Dean to when he was a toddler. He'd run toward the ducks, arms flailing, convinced they'd let him catch one. I'd laugh, coffee in hand, while Marjorie fed the crumbs she kept in her coat pocket. I sat there for a while, watching the empty path. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Just settled. Like something inside me had finally landed. There's a quiet sort of power in letting go, not out of weakness, but out of strength. I had spent too long clinging to what I hoped Dean might still be, instead of seeing him for what he had become. That night, I made dinner for myself, just a small stew, like Marjorie used to make on cold days. The house was quiet. I didn't mind it. After I ate, I slid the envelope onto the hallway table, right beside the stack of Erica's magazines. I knew she'd see it. I knew she'd open it, even though it had Dean's name on it. I didn't seal it by mistake. The next morning, I heard the usual kitchen routine, fridge opening, blender buzzing, footsteps. Then, nothing. No small talk. No passive-aggressive comments. Just silence. Dean didn't say a word to me that day. Neither did Erica. But I saw the tension in the way she avoided eye contact. I saw the way Dean kept his phone in his hand like he was deciding whether to call someone. He wouldn't. They both knew. The new will wasn't just a legal document. It was a wall, a final line they couldn't cross. A few nights later, I sat in the den with an old photo album. Marjorie and I on our wedding day. Dean's first birthday. His high school graduation, me holding his cap while he pretended not to cry. I thought about removing the pictures. About putting them away, boxing them up like the memories they'd become. But I didn't. Because those moments were real, even if everything that followed had cracked apart. Later that week, Glenn came by. Got a weird call from your boy, he said, leaning on the porch railing. Oh? Asked if I knew where your safe was. If you'd talked about your will. Said he was worried about your memory. I smiled. Of course he is. Glenn paused. What did you do, Joe? I made sure Marjorie's house stays Marjorie's. And that if anyone tries to erase her from it, they get nothing. He nodded slowly. You sure about that? As sure as I was when I married her. He let out a low whistle. Remind me never to cross you. We both laughed, soft and tired. That night, I stood in the hallway and looked at the empty envelope still sitting on the table. They hadn't moved it. That said everything. They knew the game had changed. And this time, I was the one holding the board. I suppose I could have lived with the silence. The way Dean barely made eye contact. How Erica walked past me like I was a coat rack. After a while, you grow numb to it, like an old injury that doesn't heal, just stops throbbing loud enough to notice. But there's always one moment that pushes everything too far. Mine came on a Friday evening, just after dinner. I was finishing a cup of tea when Dean knocked lightly on my door. That was rare. Normally, they just shouted from the hallway, or worse, sent a text if they wanted something. I opened the door. He looked uncomfortable, tie still loose from work, brow creased, hands fidgeting in his pockets. Got a minute? He asked. I nodded. Sure. He stepped in like a salesman, carrying a folder under his arm. So, Erica and we've been thinking. Always a bad start. We've found a place, he said. A really good facility. In Willow Creek. It's got on-site nurses, daily meals, recreational activities. Top-notch, really. I just stared at him. He opened the folder and slid a glossy brochure across my desk like it was a vacation package. They have an opening next month. It's not cheap, but we figured we could cover part of it until we sell the house. There it was. I looked down at the pictures. Clean rooms. Smiling old folks playing cards. Some guy on a stationary bike wearing khakis and a forced grin. "Dean," I said, quietly, "you want to put me in a home?" He blinked, caught off guard by how calmly I said it. "It's not like that. It's just, things aren't really working here. For any of us." I leaned back in my chair. "Because I sit too quietly? Because I still live in the house your mother and I built?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Come on, Dad, don't make this dramatic." "No. Please. Let's stay factual," I said. "You're asking me to leave the house I paid for, the house I raised you in, so you can sell it. I'm asking you to be realistic. You're not young anymore. Don't you want comfort? Companionship?" I narrowed my eyes. "You mean control. You want to control where I go, who I talk to, and what happens to this house." He stiffened. "It's not like we're putting you on the street." I stood up. Slowly. My legs didn't move as quick as they used to, but they were steady. "You've already taken my place at the table. You've taken the walls and repainted over memories. You turned this home into your showroom. And now you want to take the rest." "Dad." "No," I interrupted. "I don't need a brochure to tell me what's best. I need a son who remembers what this house means. What I mean." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. I stepped aside and opened my file cabinet. Pulled out the second copy of the will and handed it to him. "Here," I said. "Since we're being realistic." He stared at the envelope. "What is this?" "The new will. The one where you and Erica get nothing. And if you contest it, the house goes to charity." He didn't take it. Just stared at it like it was a grenade. "I know everything, Dean," I said. "The late-night conversations. The paperwork Erica wanted me to sign. Your plan to get power of attorney." His face went pale. "I may be old, but I'm not stupid. And I'm certainly not helpless." He swallowed, but his voice was barely a whisper. "You really did that?" I nodded. "And I'd do it again." He finally took the envelope, held it like it might bite him. We stood in silence for a long time. Then he turned and walked out, slowly, shoulders heavy like the truth had finally settled on them. I stood there alone, the air thick, the house so quiet I could hear the fridge hum. That night, I packed up the most important documents, the original will, my identification, deed papers, old photos of Marjorie and Dean. I placed them all in a secure folder and tucked them into a locked drawer in my room. Then I sat in my armchair, turned on Marjorie's old radio, and let the soft sound of Ella Fitzgerald fill the room. This time, there were no tears. No shaking hands. Just quiet determination. In the morning, I opened the door to the backyard and stood beneath the early sun. The garden beds were still a mess, but I saw more than weeds now. I saw space. Potential. Renewal. I made a list on a notepad, something I hadn't done in years. Not of groceries or chores, but of ideas. Visions. Plans. This house had more life left in it. And so did I. Later that day, I walked into town and visited the community center. I asked about local programs, support for veterans, at-risk youth, elderly volunteers. I wasn't sure exactly what I was building yet. But I knew I'd be the one to build it, not Dean, not Erica, not some stranger in a real estate office. This was still my home. And if they wanted me out so badly, Well, they were about to find out what it looks like when a man decides to stay with purpose. Dean's 35th birthday was supposed to be a quiet dinner. That's what he told me, anyway. Just a few friends, he said, low-key. But by 5 o'clock that evening, I knew better. Cars lined the street like it was a wedding. Laughter spilled through the open windows. The patio lights, my patio lights, were strung up in a festive web, twinkling like everything was just fine. No one had invited me. I sat in my room for a while, watching shadows move past the door. Voices I didn't recognize. Toasts, clinking glasses. My stomach twisted, not from the noise, from the message, "You're not part of this anymore." But I'd had enough of silence. I put on a clean shirt. Pressed slacks. Slipped on the shoes Marjorie gave me the Christmas before she passed. She always said they made me look respectably dangerous. I picked up the manila envelope from my desk, the final copy of the will, the deeds, a handwritten note from Margaret stating the validity of the changes, and stepped into the hallway. No one noticed me at first. Not until I walked onto the patio and stood at the head of the long table where Erica, Dean, and a dozen of their friends were gathered. The laughter stopped like someone hit a switch. Dean looked up, surprised. "Dad, what are you?" "I wasn't invited," I said calmly. "But I thought I'd come anyway. Since I live here." Someone coughed. Someone else reached for their drink. Erica's eyes narrowed. "Joe, maybe now isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time." I placed the envelope on the table and looked directly at Dean. "I know what you've been doing. The lies. The scheming. The little efforts to erase me from this house." He glanced around nervously. "Dad, can we talk about this later?" "No," I said. "Because you didn't wait. You didn't ask. You plotted behind my back and expected me to fade quietly." I turned to the table. "This house was built by me. Brick by brick. For my wife. For our son. And when she died, I kept it going. Alone. I made space for Dean and Erica when they needed it. I gave them comfort, food, stability. And this is how I was repaid, with whispers, manipulation, and an eviction plan disguised as concern." The silence was thick now. Uncomfortable. Dean stood up. "Okay, that's enough. You don't need to make a scene." "I'm not making a scene," I said, my voice steady. "I'm setting the record straight." I opened the envelope, pulled out the documents, and placed them in front of him. "This is the updated will. Legally filed. Notarized. You're no longer the beneficiary of this house. If you contest it, everything goes to charity." Erica's mouth fell open. Dean's hand started to shake. "You can't do that," he said. "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I said, "is being treated like a burden in the home I built. What's not fair is watching my son become a man who cares more about square footage than his own father." A woman at the table, someone I didn't know, whispered to her friend, "Is that true?" I heard it. Dean did too. His face flushed red. "I gave you everything," I continued. "And I would have kept giving. If you had just shown a shred of respect." Erica leaned forward, trying to salvage the moment. "We were only thinking of what's best for you." "No," I said, looking her in the eyes. "You were thinking about what's easiest for you. There's a difference." I let that settle. Then I gathered the documents, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it under my arm. "I won't be attending any more of your parties. And I won't be pushed out of my home. But you should start thinking about where you'll go next. Because when the time comes, this house won't be yours. Not now. Not ever." I turned, walked back through the house, and left them in the stunned, brittle silence they had created. The next morning, the party lights were gone. The patio was spotless. The laughter never returned. Dean barely looked at me after that. Erica stayed behind her locked door. But I had said my piece. And for once, everyone heard it. Not because I shouted. But because I had finally stopped whispering. Brain, do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. After the confrontation, the house went quiet. Not the usual quiet, not the peaceful hush of early mornings or the calm that settles after dinner, but a cold, careful silence. The kind that makes the air feel heavier, like everyone's waiting for something to break. Dean didn't speak to me for 3 days. No hello. No good night. Not even a glance as we passed each other in the hallway. Erica stopped coming into the kitchen when I was there. I'd hear her footsteps pause at the doorway, then turn back the other way. That used to bother me. Now? It felt like relief. I reclaimed the kitchen first. My hands remembered where everything was, the right cupboard for the flour, the drawer where Marjorie kept her measuring spoons, the back of the fridge where I always tucked her favorite ginger ale. I started cooking again. Not just for nourishment, but for rhythm. A way to feel the heartbeat of my home again. I made beef stew one afternoon, Marjorie's old recipe, and let it simmer until the whole house smelled like childhood. Dean walked through the hallway and paused. I heard him breathe in. I didn't turn around. Just kept stirring. He didn't say a word. But he lingered longer than usual. The town caught wind of what happened. Small towns always do. Glenn told me he'd overheard something at the hardware store, someone saying, "Did you hear about Joe? Gave his kid the boot at his own birthday party." We both laughed. "Can't believe it took you this long," Glenn said, handing me a bag of mulch. "It's strange," I replied. "You spend your whole life giving someone everything, and when they finally show you who they are, you're the one who feels guilty." He nodded. That's parenting. And sometimes surviving. The next day, I walked to the park. It was the first time I'd been there since all of this began. The trees were starting to turn, early signs of fall creeping in. Marjorie used to love this time of year. She'd say the leaves were the world's way of letting go with grace. I sat on our old bench and watched families pass by. Young parents pushing strollers. Kids kicking up leaves. A few people nodded in recognition. One woman, I didn't know her name, offered a gentle, "You did what you had to do." It felt strange, being seen like that. But it helped. That evening, as I walked home, I passed the Veterans Hall. The front sign was crooked, like it had weathered one too many storms. I remembered hearing about their funding cuts a few years back. How they'd lost most of their community programs. I stood there for a while, hands in my coat pockets, watching the light flicker in the window. Then I smiled. An idea began to take shape. Back at the house, I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where so much of my life had unfolded, and began making a list. Not chores. Not repairs. Plans. I started with the rooms, how many could be converted? How many could house someone in need? Veterans. Seniors. Young adults aging out of foster care. I didn't know all the logistics yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt purpose instead of pain. The next morning, I cleaned out Marjorie's sewing room. Folded her fabrics neatly. Boxed up her old spools of thread. I whispered, "Don't worry, love. This place will breathe again." I wasn't erasing her. I was honoring her, by filling the house with the kind of love we used to give so freely. Later that week, a knock came at the door. It was Emma, Glenn's granddaughter. 17, polite, smart as a whip. She stood there holding a small Tupperware of cookies. "Grandpa said you used to have the best garden on the block," she said. I was wondering, would you teach me? I smiled. You know what? I think I would. She came by twice that week. We cleared weeds. Turned soil. Talked about everything from tomatoes to Taylor Swift. She reminded me of Dean when he was little, curious, eager, full of questions. Except she looked me in the eye when I answered. One evening, she looked up from the flower bed and said, "My mom thinks what you did was brave." I nodded slowly. It didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. She smiled. Still. Not a lot of people would have done it. I didn't know what to say to that. But it stuck with me. Back inside, I passed by Dean's door. It was half closed. I caught a glimpse of him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and didn't care. Either way, I kept walking. I didn't need his approval anymore. For the first time in a long while, I felt like myself again. Not a burden. Not a ghost. Not an old man waiting to be moved along. Just a man with a purpose, standing in the house he built, finally breathing again. The next week, I stopped by the Veterans Hall again. This time, I didn't just stare from the sidewalk. I walked inside. It smelled like dust and old coffee, and the overhead lights buzzed with that tired flicker you only notice when everything else has gone quiet. There were a few men sitting at a long table playing dominoes, old-timers like me, with weary eyes and stories that could fill volumes. "Can I help you?" one of them asked, looking up. I introduced myself and asked for the coordinator. A woman named Janice came out from the back, middle-aged, no nonsense, the kind of person who ran on caffeine and purpose. "I was wondering," I said carefully, "if you ever partner with local homeowners." She gave me a wary look. "For what?" "For housing. Community support. Maybe shared programming." She crossed her arms. "You offering a donation?" "No," I said. "I'm offering a house." That got her attention. I told her everything, about the rooms, the history, the silence that had filled the place for too long. About Marjorie. About wanting to see the house live again. Really live. She sat down across from me, studying my face like she was trying to figure out if I was crazy or sincere. "Maybe a little of both." "You'd be open to housing veterans?" she asked slowly. "Sharing your home?" "Not renting," I said. "Not boarding. Living. Eating meals together. Helping where needed. Making the place a home again." She leaned back and whistled. You don't hear that every day. We talked for over an hour. She asked about logistics, zoning, licenses. I told her I had a lawyer who was already drawing up documents. She promised to connect me with the right people, social workers, case managers, even a small local nonprofit that helped with funding. By the time I left, she had a dozen names written in a notebook and a spark in her eye. That night, I sat in Marjorie's chair and stared at the photo of our wedding day. I held it in my lap and whispered, "You wouldn't believe what I just did." But I think she would have. She always believed in me more than I did myself. The next day, I got to work. I started with the guest room, cleared out old boxes, donated what I could. Emma came by after school and helped sweep, dust, and wipe the windows until the sunlight poured in like it used to. "I think this room could be for someone quiet," she said thoughtfully. "Someone who likes books." I smiled. "I think you're right." We labeled boxes, sorted tools, repaired loose doorknobs. Dean passed by once while we were sanding the windowsills. He watched for a second, then turned and walked away. He hadn't said much since the confrontation. But I saw something in his eyes that day, confusion, maybe. Or shame. I didn't chase it. That night, Glenn came by with a six-pack and a bag of screws. "Heard you're remodeling," he grinned. "You volunteering?" I'm already here, aren't I? We laughed and got to work. The living room needed new shelving. Glenn offered to bring lumber. I found Marjorie's old patterns and decided to turn the sunroom into a small reading lounge. The house began to change, not in the way Erica had wanted, with paint swatches and granite countertops, but in the way a house should change, through purpose. Word started to spread. A retired school teacher dropped off some books. A neighbor donated an old twin bed. Emma's mom offered to help cook once a week. The house wasn't full yet, not even close. But it wasn't empty anymore either. One morning, Janice called. "We've got a candidate," she said. "Name's Alonzo. Vietnam vet. Lost his wife last year. Quiet guy. Been couch hopping ever since. Does he like lemon pie?" I asked. She laughed. "Guess we'll find out." I cleaned the guest room again that afternoon. Fresh sheets. Open windows. I put one of Marjorie's old recipe cards on the nightstand, not for him to use, just as a welcome. A piece of her warmth. That evening, while I was setting the table for dinner, just habit at this point, Dean finally spoke. "You're really doing this," he said, leaning against the doorframe. I looked up. "Yes. I am." He glanced at the table. "You're turning our house into, what? A boarding house?" "No," I said, placing a fork down. "A home. For people who still know what one feels like." He didn't reply. Just stared at me for a long while. Then, without a word, turned and walked away. I didn't follow him. I just set one more place at the table. Not for him. For Alonzo. Alonzo moved in on a quiet Tuesday. He didn't bring much, a duffel bag, a photo album, and a paperback he'd read so many times the spine had given out. Janice helped him carry his things into the guest room, and I stood in the hallway, unsure if I should act like a host or a roommate. He looked around, nodded, and said, "Smells like real food. Haven't had that in a while." I smiled. "Marjorie's lemon pie is in the oven. Hope you're not shy about sugar." He chuckled, a low, gravelly sound that felt older than both of us. Not a bit. Alonzo was a man of few words. He didn't pry, didn't overshare. But every now and then, over coffee or while trimming the hedges together, he'd drop a little story, about his wife, who collected bird figurines, about the time he and his squad built a grill out of an old oil drum in '69, about how he used to sing gospel to his daughter when she had nightmares. There was grief in him, but also grace. Emma kept visiting. She brought her homework and helped paint the sunroom, which we'd turned into a quiet library. She got Alonzo talking more than I ever could. Something about her reminded him of someone, maybe his daughter, maybe just the better parts of his past. "I like this one," he told me one evening as we washed dishes. "She asks good questions." "She's got a good heart," I said. More guests followed. A retired nurse named Bernice came next, frail hands, sharp mind, stories that could make you laugh and cry in the same sentence. She baked snickerdoodles every Sunday, insisted we all sit together like family. Then came Miguel, 32, quiet, fresh out of the foster system and barely hanging on. He was tentative, unsure. But after the first meal, when Bernice complimented his posture and Alonzo offered him the last biscuit, he smiled for the first time in what must have been weeks. We never called it a shelter. Or a group home. We just called it Marjorie's house. The name felt right. Her presence was everywhere, in the floral curtains she chose, the way the garden bloomed under Emma's care, the recipes taped inside the kitchen cabinet. Every time someone thanked me for dinner or said goodnight, I felt her there, nodding quietly. We created new rituals. Mondays were tea nights, everyone sat around the table and shared something they remembered from their past. Fridays were movie nights. Glenn installed a projector in the living room, and we took turns picking old films. Alonzo loved westerns. Bernice liked black and white romances. Miguel chose Pixar, every time. It was strange how quickly the house came alive again. It wasn't loud, not exactly. Just full. Full of footsteps, of voices, of purpose. One afternoon, as I trimmed the hedges, I saw Dean's car parked across the street. He was just sitting there. Not coming up. Not honking. Just watching. I didn't wave. He didn't get out. But he saw it. All of it. The garden, the porch, the chairs on the lawn, the laughter drifting through open windows. He saw that the house he tried to empty was now filled with something better than his plans. He drove away 5 minutes later. Emma asked me once, "Do you think he's jealous?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I think he's ashamed. And he doesn't know what to do with that." She nodded, accepting the answer without needing more. One evening, she brought over her little cousin, a girl no older than 7. The girl ran through the house, wide-eyed, and then stopped suddenly in front of Marjorie's photo in the hallway. "Is that your wife?" she asked. "Yes," I said gently. "She's really pretty. She looks like she'd make good soup." I laughed. She did. She reached out and touched the frame. "She'd be happy you made this house fun again." I swallowed hard, looked up at the ceiling, and whispered, "I hope so." The most unexpected thing, though, was how little I missed my old routines. I didn't miss the silence. The isolation. The feeling of tiptoeing through my own life. Now, every day had rhythm. Someone always needed something. A ride. A repair. A pair of listening ears. And I had something to give. One night, after dinner, we all sat in the living room, the smell of Bernice's cookies still warm in the air. Alonzo turned to me and said, "You know, I didn't think I'd have another home. Thought I'd just wait out the clock in silence." He looked around. "But this feels like family." Miguel nodded. "It's the first time I've ever been able to sleep without locking the door." Even Bernice, in her soft voice, said, "Marjorie would be proud, honey." That one nearly took me out. I just nodded, gripping my tea a little tighter. Dean still hadn't come by. And I didn't expect him to. I'd stopped hoping for an apology. Stopped needing him to understand. Because in that moment, surrounded by people who weren't my blood but were still mine, I realized something. Family isn't just who you raise. It's who you show up for. And who shows up for you. It was late November when Dean finally came back. The air had that sharp bite to it, the kind that made your bones ache before you even stepped outside. I was sitting in the sunroom, polishing the frame around Marjorie's wedding photo, when I heard the knock. Not the usual tap-tap of Emma, or the sturdy bang Glenn used when his hands were full. This was slow. Hesitant. Almost apologetic. When I opened the door, Dean stood there. Alone. No Erica. No excuses. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not in size, but in presence. Like the wind had taken something out of him. "Hey," he said. I nodded. "Hey." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was long and tangled. He glanced past me into the hallway, where laughter echoed from the kitchen. Alonzo and Miguel were arguing over the best way to cook rice. Bernice was humming while folding napkins. Emma was painting something on the wall near the dining room, a small mural of Marjorie's favorite flower, lilies. Dean's eyes drifted back to me. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "You're always welcome in this house. As long as you come with honesty." He walked slowly, taking it all in, the rearranged furniture, the new bookshelves, the smell of something sweet baking in the oven. He looked at the people moving around with ease and familiarity. "This is different," he murmured. "It's better," I said. "Not perfect. But better." He didn't argue. I led him to the den. We sat across from each other, the old lamp casting a soft glow between us. For a moment, it felt like old times. Like maybe he was still that boy who once begged me to read Where the Red Fern Grows 3 nights in a row. I wanted to say, he stopped. Rubbed his palms together. "I've been thinking a lot." I waited. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About the house. About you. About everything." He looked down, his voice barely more than a breath. "Erica left. Took the car. The savings. Everything. Said she couldn't live with someone who let his father outsmart him." I raised an eyebrow. "That's what she said?" He gave a small, bitter laugh. "More or less. She didn't like what you did. She said you embarrassed me." I let that hang in the air a second. "She was wrong," I said. "I didn't embarrass you. I reminded you." He nodded slowly. "Yeah. I reminded you who built this. Who gave you everything. And what happens when you forget." He winced, but didn't argue. "I was angry," he said. "But mostly at myself. I don't know when I stopped seeing you as my father. You were always just there. And I took that for granted." I looked at him carefully. "Do you regret it? Or are you just lonely now?" He didn't answer right away. "Both," he admitted. "But mostly the first." That was enough for me. Not full forgiveness. Not a sweeping gesture. Just enough. "I didn't come for the house," he added. "I came to see if there's any part of you that still wants to see me." I looked at him for a long time. "You were my world once, Dean. You and your mother. I would have given you everything. I nearly did. But I had to choose between protecting you, or protecting what your mother and I built. And for the first time in my life, I chose something else." He nodded. "I know. You're not cut out of my life," I said. "But you are cut out of the will. That's not a punishment. It's just the cost of a lesson." He swallowed hard. "Okay." We sat in silence for a while. Then I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a photo, a small, faded picture of Dean as a baby, laying on Marjorie's chest. Her smile was so wide, it looked like it could light the whole world. I handed it to him. He stared at it, eyes glistening. "I forgot this picture existed." "I never did," I said. "It reminded me of who you used to be." He held it to his chest. "I want to be better. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to come by sometimes. Help out. Maybe get to know the people here." I nodded slowly. "That's up to them," I said. "But I won't stop you from trying." He looked relieved. Tired. Human. Before he left, he paused at Marjorie's photo in the hallway. "I let her down," he said quietly. I walked up beside him. "For a while, yes. But you showed up today. That's a start." He looked at me, eyes searching. "I'm proud of what you've done here, Dad." I didn't say anything. Just nodded once. Then I watched him walk down the porch steps and disappear into the cool dusk. The photo he held was still visible in his hand, pressed against his chest like a compass. He didn't come for the house. He came for something much harder to earn. And maybe, in time, he'd find it again. Speech balloon, would you have forgiven him? Let us know in the comments. The day we held the open house for Marjorie's house, the sky was the exact shade of blue she always loved. Crisp, cloudless, with just a sliver of breeze, enough to make the wind chimes on the porch sing softly. I woke early, before the sun, and brewed a pot of coffee in the kitchen, the way she used to, slow, patient, no rush. I sat at the table, staring at the spot where her hands used to rest as she read the newspaper. I could almost hear her voice. "You did good, Joe. You really did." By 9, the house was buzzing with life. Neighbors came. The mayor, too, just a handshake and a speech, but still. Veterans from the hall rolled in on scooters and walkers. A few kids ran around in the backyard, chasing each other through the newly planted garden beds Emma and I had filled with herbs and wildflowers. The sunroom was filled with donations, clothes, books, warm blankets. Bernice had baked 3 dozen cookies and arranged them like a display at a bakery. Alonzo, dressed in his best flannel, greeted people at the door like he'd been doing it his whole life. Miguel played quiet jazz on the borrowed keyboard from the community center. Glenn brought his granddaughter and proudly pointed to the patio furniture he'd helped repair. "Solid enough to survive another generation," he joked. I stood near the back, watching. I didn't speak much that day. I didn't need to. The house spoke for itself. Marjorie's photo hung near the front entrance, framed in soft wood, surrounded by fresh lilies. People stopped and looked, some smiled, some asked who she was. "She's why this house breathes again," I told one woman, who nodded like she understood without needing a full story. Later, Emma pulled me outside and handed me a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" I asked. "A speech. You should say something. It's your house." I opened it, only a few lines, in her careful handwriting. "You taught me that family isn't just who shares your name. It's who shares your table. Who sees you. Thank you for seeing all of us." I swallowed hard and folded the paper back. "I think you just gave the speech for me," I said. She smiled, leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a moment, I felt the weight of everything, the grief, the loss, the betrayal, all drift into something softer. Something lighter. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the trees, I stood on the porch and looked out at the people gathered on the lawn. Some were strangers when they walked through the door that morning. But none of them felt like strangers now. Dean arrived just as the crowd began to thin. He didn't come inside. Just stood at the gate, watching. A box in his hands. I walked over slowly. He looked tired but grounded. No longer the man who felt entitled to everything, but the son who finally understood what it meant to earn something. "This belonged to Mom," he said, lifting the box. "Found it in storage. Thought it should be here." Inside was her old recipe book, the original, handwritten one, full of grease-stained pages and tiny notes in the margins. I ran my fingers over her handwriting. The lemon pie recipe was folded and refolded, almost worn through. "You kept this all these years?" I asked. Dean nodded. "I didn't know why. Until now. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to." Instead, I walked back to the house and placed the book on the kitchen shelf, right where it used to be. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat in the living room beside Alonzo, Bernice, and Miguel. We drank tea, played cards, and laughed about nothing in particular. Later, I walked through each room. The sewing room was now a reading lounge, full of soft chairs and donated books. The guest rooms had names now: the Willow Room, the Sunset Room, Marjorie's Corner. The house felt full. Not crowded, full. Full of memory, and music, and second chances. I stood in the hallway and touched the photo of Marjorie one last time. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I kept it alive." She didn't answer, of course. But the wind chimes outside rang once, gently. I smiled. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and went to bed. Not as a man trying to hold on to the past. But as a man who had finally made peace with it,